Actually, the idea of global governance and a one-world order has been around for centuries, and the term New World Order has been used frequently in recent history.
The New World Order means different things to different people, but to those who expect to be in control of it, it means the same thing. It means all the world under their control.
The first in-depth publication of note was Samuel Zane Batten's work, The New World Order, which was published in 1919. Under the cloak of Christianity, this order speaks of a new world rising and advocates social control over all people and all resources. It promotes a world federation with a world parliament, an international court, and a global police force. Some of its goals are as follows. Community. The danger and loss in crime and degeneracy. The determination to make community life safe, sanitary, wholesome, and moral. Industrial. The disappearance of class distinctions and the solidarity of all interests in the economic process. National. The conception of the nation's welfare as the supreme concern, with the policy that everything shall contribute to this end, and every person must do some useful work. International. The creation of an international mind, with a world consciousness and a world patriotism. The destruction of every arbitrary power that can separately and of its single choice disturb the peace of the world.
Well, government is good, right? It put an end to war. Well, it could put an end to war because you just only have one dictator. I think Adolf Hitler had that in mind. He wanted a world government too, with himself as the master leader.
Many have regarded Hitler as the apex of evil, a true heart of darkness. But how many people know that Hitler had his own vision of a new world order? Hitler had been promoted by the establishment. He graced the cover of Time magazine many times and was their Man of the Year twice. His vision was simple: unify Europe and then the world. The only real difference was that his order was racially motivated, instead of being based solely on religion. He even wrote a lesser-known follow-up to Mein Kampf in 1928 that many have dubbed My Order, or New World Order.
Nazi forces openly seek to establish systems of government based on the regimentation of all human beings by a handful of individual rulers who seize power by force. Yes, these men and their hypnotized followers call this a new order. It is not new, and it is not order.
The idea of globalization was so prominent in Nazi ideology that the 1936 Berlin Games would be the first time that the Olympic rings would be displayed prominently and promoted in order to glorify the Third Reich. This symbol represents the 5 major regions of the world: Africa, America, Asia, Europe, and Oceania, interlocking and coming together as one. This one-world philosophy still defines the Olympic Games today. Hitler's methods of youth corps, concentration camps, eugenics, and military aggression were so visible to the rest of the world, he eventually failed. However, his vision of a new world order lived on. Author H.G. Wells, the man behind The Time Machine and War of the Worlds, would write about a planned world state in which there must be a common faith and law for mankind. In 1939, he would publish a full book on the matter called The New World Order. Wells again has a similar vision, stating that national individualism has to go and that sovereign states must end. He then goes on to write, in the great struggle to evoke westernized world socialism, contemporary governments may vanish. Perhaps his most chilling prediction is that countless people will hate the New World Order, be rendered unhappy by frustration and their passions and ambitions through its advent, and will die protesting against it. Many of them quite gallant and graceful-looking people.
Collectivism is that concept where individuals are considered to be discardable, and that the group is more important, and that the ultimate group, of course, is the state. And so it boils down eventually to the fact that the state is the all-important unit of society, and citizens exist only to serve the state.
Other men of prominence would also promote a New World Order during the 1960s, including industrialist and former New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller. These are some of the reasons pressing us to lead vigorously towards the true building of a New World Order. Rockefeller would also become vice president under Gerald Ford. Religious leader Pope Paul VI, delegates to international organizations, public officials, gentlemen of the press, teachers and educators, all of you must realize that you have your part to play in the construction of a new world order. As well as former President Richard Nixon.
And the hope that each of us has to build a new world order.
However, Nixon was largely a mouthpiece for his most dominant advisor, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Kissinger may be the most vocal proponent for a new world order of his era. He has called for it time and time again, in policy papers, meetings, and interviews. Time magazine recognized both Nixon and Kissinger as Men of the Year after announcing their New World Order in China. However, they were working on it long before. In these once classified documents, they both discussed the new order with the president of Indonesia.
Where are we as we think about this time in American foreign policy? Are we at a special moment which is being redefined? Or are we creating a new world order?
We're at a moment when the international system is in a period of change like we haven't seen for several hundred years. In some parts of the world, the nation state on which the existing international system was based is either giving up its traditional aspects, like in Europe, or as in the Middle East.
George H.W. Bush would campaign for a new world order like no other president before him. He would openly discuss it during his State of the Union address.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind.
Again, a unified Europe was a major goal in creating this order.
With few exceptions, the world now stands as one. A year and a half ago, in Germany, I said that our goal was a Europe whole and free. Tonight, Germany is united. Europe has become whole and free. The world can therefore seize this opportunity to fulfill the long-held promise of a new world order. We can find meaning and reward by serving some higher purpose than ourselves. A shining purpose, the illumination of 1,000 points of light.
Bush Sr. and his administration would tour and promote this agenda across the board at any given opportunity.
The President has spoken often of a new world order.
And we have an unprecedented opportunity to build a new era of peace and prosperity here and abroad, to build a new world order.
It's my understanding, I think that the President, and I don't know the context of how it came up in his speech last night in New York, said that China must be a part of the New World Order. Guess I would like to ask you how you envision China fitting into the New World Order.
It is a country that we are going to have relationships with by virtue of its geopolitical importance.
American officials say breaking down regional and national barriers to the flow of goods and services would represent a spectacular benefit to economies around the world.
We are building a new world order.
Bush would actually make a commencement address at Maxwell Air Force Base declaring the birth of this order.
And that's why I wanted to speak to you today about the new world taking shape around us, about the prospects for a new world order now within our reach. In the coming weeks, I'll be talking in some detail about the possibility of a new world order emerging after the Cold War. But today, I want to discuss another aspect of that order. You see, as the Cold War drew to an end, we saw the possibilities of a new order in which nations work together. It refers to new ways of working with other nations to deter aggression and to achieve stability. As old threats recede, new threats emerge. The quest for the new world order is in part a challenge to keep the dangers of disorder at bay. We must build on the successes of Desert Storm to give new shape and momentum to this new world order. Only when this transformation is complete will we be able to take full measure of the opportunities presented by this new and evolving world order. The new world order really is a tool for addressing a new world of possibilities. This order gains its mission and shape not just from shared interests, but from shared ideals.
After the Gulf War had ended, Bush was so obsessed with the idea of a new world order that he had a series of Glocks imprinted with the term that he would give to members of his administration, including Colin Powell, Brent Scowcroft, Dick Cheney, and General Norman Schwarzkopf. Cheney would even approve policy papers regarding the New World Order.
Defense Secretary Dick Cheney has approved a revised draft of a policy document on the New World Order. The Pentagon is backing off a controversial earlier draft and has abandoned a one superpower strategy. The final document puts more emphasis on international alliances and organizations.
This would become an unprecedented time period for people all over the globe to discuss at length what the New World Order meant to them. People within the media.
Does anybody want to talk about the New World Order? Is there a New World Order out there, or is this a vision that exists in the... He does have his vision, there's no doubt about that. But does that exist in the president's mind, or does it exist out there in reality?
This president sees this episode as the first test case, as the first example for the New World Order he is trying to organize.
Some people have called it the New World Disorder, and there's a lot of truth to that.
University and institutional chairs.
I mean, we're talking a New World Order at Georgetown. And we'd like to be very much a part of it and continue to live.
This is a world that is likely to be dominated in the near future, and perhaps longer, by the Gulf War and the New World Order, which is the buzzword of the moment.
So the secret of a new world order, and at this point it's just a slogan, but it does have some historical background in terms that orders have succeeded each other over time. The secret of this is to learn how to use coalitions. We are effective in the United Nations.
People within government.
George Bush has invoked a new world order without enunciating a new American purpose. The president has still failed to articulate clear goals for our nation's foreign policy in this new age.
I find the term New World Order very revolting, and just not only historically but politically today. I think Harding is absolutely right, and the actions of the administration just after enunciation of the New World Order put the lie to the fact there is any real substance behind what they say as New World Order. The first act of the New World Order was A, to make war, and then B, was to sell arms all over again.
Is there a New World Order? We know certainly that George Bush has copyrighted the term at this point. In the aftermath of this war, though, is it an empty vessel into which something will be poured? Is it the appropriate term to use? Is it going to be a New World Order, or will disorder be just as significant in this process as we look ahead? Let's start with Madeline.
I think that we have, in fact, kind of had this term thrown at us, and many of us have not liked it, partially because of the previous historical connotation, and partially because I think it doesn't really deal with the way the world ought to be or is at the moment. But we are far from seeing a world order, and I'm not sure that it is in best U.S. interest to have a new world order in which we are the policeman.
While many began to become critical of this order, the term began to evaporate into the background.
We are very, very skeptical of an international order if we are not sure how the rules will be made, because thus far the international order has been made with rules that we had no input into and that affect us, and even when on the few occasions when the rules will seem to favor us, then they get changed. A unipolar world, a world of one superpower, may be quite dangerous for us.
The New World Order under the United Nations would mean, among other things, an end to our God-given rights given us and secured by the Constitution.
The New World Order, which now has been called by some the New World Disorder, and by some people on the more liberal persuasion, the taking over of the world by the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the UN to put us all in slavery.
Its roots go way, way back in history, and they go back to the formation of a secret society, a secret organization that was created by Cecil Rhodes, very powerful and very wealthy individual. And people have heard about him in history, and they know about the Rhodes Scholarship, and they think, well, isn't that nice? That they don't understand at all what that's all about. Cecil Rhodes, when he died, left his great fortune not to his family, not to his heirs, but for the creation of a secret society. And we know about this because there were some people very intimately involved with this organization who wrote about it. One of the best authors on this topic is Professor Carroll Quigley. He wrote several books, and Tragedy and Hope is the best known of his. He described in detail the secret organization created by Cecil Rhodes, and he explains in these books he knows about them because he was invited by the organization into its inner circle. He was never a member of it, but he was invited in as their historian, and he was allowed to see their secret records and papers and study them for several years. And he knew all the important players, and he understood what it was about, and so he wrote these books. It's an amazing thing because he laid out in great detail what the purpose of the organization was and how they were the major players in all of the big international events since and including World War I. The bottom line is that you take the roots of that organization and you find out that they created in all of the British dependencies what they call roundtable groups. And then around those little roundtable groups, they created front groups. And the purpose of these front groups and roundtable groups was to penetrate into the governments of all of these different countries, to penetrate into the media centers, to penetrate into the educational systems. In other words, to penetrate into the social fabric, the power centers of society, and literally take them over from the inside without anybody being aware that they were controlling influence.
After World War I, the International League of Nations arose as a precursor to the United Nations in 1919, under what seemed to be the vision of President Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points.
The League of Nations was the first attempt at the New World Order, the first attempt at a global government based on the model of collectivism. And it was the brainchild of the elitists, the ancestors of the very people who are still working on this project. They're collectivists, the very wealthy people. They're the ones in this country who dominated the powerful tax-exempt foundations, like the Carnegie Endowment Fund for International Peace. the Rockefeller funds, the Ford Foundation, and groups like that. These people were on record, even way back then, that they had to have a new world government, and they dreamed of that being embodied in the League of Nations. And they were solidly behind it. And that was one of the reasons those people encouraged the United States into World War I, was because of the crisis of World War I, and that would also condition Americans to thinking of making big changes in their system, because we certainly don't want another war like that, do we? There's that fear angle again. And they thought, well, by being in World War I, then we would be a major participant at the table to carve up the world and create a new world government. And that was to be the League of Nations. Well, what happened to it is that the American people didn't really go for it.
Wilson was aware of the elite and their control over society. In his book, The New Freedom, published in 1913, he discussed such a group. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacture, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Ultimately, this insight did not spare him from becoming yet another puppet of the global elite.
In all of the British dependencies, these organizations, the front groups, were called the Royal Institute for International Affairs. In the United States, they chose a different name. They chose the Council on Foreign Relations, but it held exactly the same relationship to this inner society of Cecil Rhodes.
Among the charter members were W. Averill Harriman of Union Banking, then President of the United States Woodrow Wilson's main advisor, Colonel Edward Mendell House, John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil, banking mogul J.P. Morgan, and prominent bankster Paul Warburg.
Well, the Council on Foreign Relations exists today. It's probably the most powerful single organization in America. Many observers, including myself, believe that it is the hidden government of the United States. These people are not elected to office, and most Americans don't even know who they are. But they are holding all of the important positions in society. There are only about 4,000 of them in the United States, but I don't care what organization you want to look at, whether it's government, or whether it's universities, or the large media centers, or whatever it is. You look at the people at the tops of those organizations, the owners, the managers, the CEOs, the board of directors, and I'm going to say probably 80 to 90% of the great power centers of America are dominated by just those 4,000 people who are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, why is that important? It's important because the avowed purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is to create a new world order, a global government based on the model of collectivism. And that includes the elimination of the United States as a sovereign nation. That's why it's important. The people running this country are determined to destroy it.
The Council was heavily criticized during the 1980s for being an organization hell-bent on destroying national sovereignty in favor of a world government. So many of its members hid their association with the organization. Dick Cheney had this to say in response to a question by David Rockefeller, who became the CFR's youngest director in 1949 and was chairman of the board from 1970 to 1985. He remains an honorary chairman to this day.
You have these private groups that are run and created by the elite, by the ultra-rich, wealthy families that have been manipulating global markets from behind the scenes for generations. They create these private groups that then feed information to the government, to senators, to congressmen, their recommendations, their policy papers, what they think should happen. And it's fascinating because if you actually read what it is that they're doing, the recommendations that they make, they're very able to get them put in place. discussions that are going on in these private groups are really talks that should be going on in Senate committees and in the halls of Congress, but they're happening with these ultra elite groups that are then pushing their propaganda into the political mainstream, and then it's becoming enacted, it's becoming put into law. New World Order wants a global system where one small central authority of individuals can then dictate a policy that's going to be distributed down to the rest of the world, everywhere, in the smallest little town in the middle of nowhere in some remote country.
I now think it's safe to say that the Council is extremely influential on the world stage and openly promote global governance. The Council and the globalists were able to take this agenda to the next level following World War II. The United Nations was born out of the ashes of this conflict. Unlike the League of Nations, the United States not only joined this organization, they championed it.
First book I wrote was The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. It was written at a time when it was not popular to be critical of the UN. I mean, the United Nations was viewed by almost everybody as our last best hope for peace. It was a means, we were told, to bring humanity together and put an end to war and live in peace and harmony and promote trade and all of these good things. I wish it were any of those things, but it's not.
The original charter for the United Nations was drafted in San Francisco in 1945, and the United States became a permanent member of the Security Council, along with France, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and the Republic of China. The process by which other nations' belief systems could be used to erode and eviscerate our Constitution and Bill of Rights had taken a giant leap forward.
The United Nations is one of the most well-known sort of globalization attempts. Its primary goal is to streamline all the governments of the world, to create a global council and to unify all the rules and all the regulations for the world. So it's essentially the precursor and an engine of this new world order.
The United Nations is made up of all of the countries of the world, most of which are dictatorships of one kind or another. And you don't take a bunch of dictatorships and put them into a bag and shake it up and come out with a freedom-loving governmental unit. You come out with a global dictatorship.
This was the public base of global governance. However, many other organizations have been birthed since.
Even more suspect is a private group called the Trilateral Commission.
David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger are among its some 300 influential members.
The Trilateral Commission, rich and powerful business and political leaders from Japan, Europe, and North America, the New York-based policy group was formed in 1973 by Chase Manhattan Bank Chairman David Rockefeller. In addition to Rockefeller, there are many other noted American members. Among them, economist Alan Greenspan, former Defense Secretary Harold Brown. George Bush was once a member but resigned last year before his unsuccessful presidential campaign. Back then, it wasn't politically wise to be aligned with what his party's right wing considered a shadow world government.
The United Nations would take over America. The Trilateral Commission would control the world. Just look at its membership, they say. Current and former members include Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Carter. Names like Brzezinski, Christopher, Kissinger, and Schultz. And top executives of ITT, Xerox, Exxon, and Nations Bank.
Although this group with only 300 members seems to be at the apex of the power structure, there is yet another group formed in 1954 that is even smaller in number and has a greater influence on world events. Meet the Bilderberg Group. This elite group meet annually around the globe. There is a core group of members who have attended every year for decades, such as David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, and Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. These members invite others who are politically and socially relevant at the time. Each year, around 140 people are in attendance.
It's known as the Bilderberg Group. Could their objective be world domination?
I'm Jim Tucker. I've chased Bilderberg for 30 years. I'll never give up the chase. Bilderberg plan for the whole world is nothing less than world government.
I'm not comfortable with that at all. Who elected these guys to run the planet?
They are the elitists. They feel they should run the world for their own selfish interest.
Now we can see a new world
coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
Bilderberg is making great progress toward a world government, and only an educated, informed public can stop them in their tracks.
In the near future, Earth is dominated by a powerful world government. Once free nations are slaves to the will of a tiny elite. The dawn of a new dark age is upon mankind. Countries are a thing of the past. Every form of independence is under attack, with the family and even the individual itself nearing extinction. Close to 80% of the Earth's population has been eliminated. The remnants of a once free humanity are forced to live within highly controlled, compact, prison-like cities. Travel is highly restricted. Superhighways connect the megacities and keep the population from entering into unauthorized zones. No human activity is private. AI supercomputers chronicle and categorize every action. A prison planet dominated by a ruthless gang of control freaks whose power can never be challenged. This is the vision of the global elite, their goal. A program of total dehumanization, where the science of tyranny is law. A worldwide control grid, designed to ensure the overlord's monopoly of power forever. Our species will be condemned to this nightmare future unless the masses are awakened to the New World Order master plan and mobilized to defeat it. Erected by a secretive group, the Georgia Guidestones are a testament to the elite's plan for a world religion, global laws, with a global court and army to enforce it. And set in stone, it is written that the population never rise above 500 million. In this film, you will learn how our world is truly governed. You will see how highly secretive roundtable groups interlock to form a global intelligence network. This group has been steering planetary affairs for hundreds of years. Now, in the final stage, they prepare for open world government. A goal tyrants throughout history have lusted after.
It's really always the same. You go back throughout all of history, the Roman Empire, the Soviet Union, Hitler during the Nazism was always saying that it's going to create the utopia for the average person, when in fact, history always shows that it does exactly the opposite.
Conquest and empire is as old as civilization. Babylon, Egypt, and Greece. They all built empires in an attempt to rule the world. The Roman system at its peak dominated the known world. Complex governmental systems were developed to control diverse populations. During the period between the 15th and 19th century, new empires emerged and again waged war for supremacy. The nobility, as well as the thriving merchant class, were financed by a handful of private banks. Many of the great money houses would hedge their bets and finance both sides of a war. Sophisticated intelligence-gathering networks gave the financiers a clear edge over the governments they were slowly gaining control of. On the 18th of June, 1815, agents of the British arm of the Rothschild family looked on as Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte fought desperately to save his army from the jaws of a British-Prussian pincer attack. A Rothschild agent was able to get the news of Napoleon's defeat at the hands of Lord Wellington to Nathan Rothschild, a full 20 hours before the news reached London. Nathan, the head of the British arm of the Rothschild family, put out the rumor to the London Stock Exchange that Napoleon had won the war. Stocks plunged by 98%, and Rothschild was then able to buy up the entire British economy for pennies on the pound. When the news of Napoleon's defeat finally arrived, stocks soared. Britain was now the undisputed ruler of Europe, and Rothschild ruled England. The already dominant British Empire grew even more aggressive. Her troops and bureaucracy spread across the globe. The sun never set on Britannia's holdings.
The banking cartel funded, in fact, since about 1800, they have funded both sides of almost every war. And of course, they're getting the interest off of the loans that they've given the various governments and the wars that they have actually helped stimulate and create.
By 1900, Germany was a rising force and a leader of the Industrial Revolution.
World War I, for instance, there was absolutely no reason to have World War I, except that it was an ideal opportunity for the banking cartel to make a pile of money by funding both sides of that particular war.
On June 28, 1914, the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated while traveling in a motorcade. The Black Hand, a Serbian secret society with connections to French and British intelligence, took credit. World War I had begun. Armaments companies financed by Rothschild-controlled banks in Germany, France, England, and Austria bankrolled all the factions. At least 20 million were killed in the war. It was a conflict so terrible the people vowed to never fight again. They dubbed it the war to end all wars.
Question is, why did they want war? Well, first of all, is money and power. But secondly, they wanted to create the League of Nations. They had this in their plans all along, and as a consequence, once the war was over or about to be over, they began to formulate this idea of a League of Nations so this would never ever happen again.
Hundreds of years of practice made the British experts at hiding their empire behind puppet governments and councils. In the name of stopping all future conflicts, they proposed that countries would join a League of Nations. Their true intention was for the League to serve as a framework for world government. President Woodrow Wilson, who had spearheaded the establishment of the private Federal Reserve System in the United States in 1913, strongly supported the establishment of the League of Nations.
Woodrow Wilson was a very naive president. He was basically a college professor that was grafted into this whole system.
The League convened in Paris in 1919, but many nations recognized it as a threat to their sovereignty and refused to join. Frustrated by the U.S. Congress blocking the League of Nations, British intelligence, with the help of the Rockefeller family, set up the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City in 1921. The Council recruited the best and brightest of American life to support the growth of the Anglo-American Empire. The CFR's stated mission is to abolish all nation-states in favor of an all-powerful world government administered by a tiny elite. By 1930, the promoters of world government had split into two interlocking camps: the Fabian socialists centered in London, and the fascists based in Italy and Germany.
National Socialism will use its own revolution for establishing a new world order. Adolf Hitler.
Supporters of the fascists in the United States and England believed that the military should be used to quickly transform the world into a new world order, while the more sophisticated practitioners of globalism stated that incrementalism was the sure path to world domination. Congressional Medal of Honor winner Major General Smedley Butler went public in 1934, exposing an attempt by the robber barons to launch a military overthrow of the United States. The war hero testified to the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in Congress that some of the most powerful men in America had tried to recruit him to lead a military coup so they could set up National Socialism in the United States.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
The fascist had also made deep inroads in England. Edward VIII, King of England, was forced to abdicate the throne because of his public support for Hitler.
Es ist dabei nicht nur das negative Problem der Bekämpfung der Lehre und ihrer Organisation handelt, sondern die Durchführung der positiven Aufgabe der Gewinnung des deutschen Arbeiters für den nationalen Staat.
Though the German-led fascist camp was strong, the Fabian Socialist Bloc was able to maintain control of the U.S., Russia, and England. In the build-up to World War II, and during the conflict, the bankers again financed both sides, just as they had done with Napoleon. With the rise and fall of the Third Reich, Europe lay in ruins. Once again, the elite claimed that only global governance could save humanity from certain destruction. And this time, the elite would succeed in setting up their world body. In April of 1945, at the Presidio Naval Base in San Francisco, the United Nations was founded by the victors of World War II. The United Nations complex was then built in New York City on land donated by John D. Rockefeller. Shortly after the elite established the United Nations as their base in the United States, the newly formed World Council quickly began work on the next phase in their plan, the incremental formation of continental superstates. The first step in their trilateral plan was the creation of the European Union. Unifying Europe had been tried many times and was extremely unpopular. Where Napoleon and Hitler had failed to accomplish their goals using force, the globalists would succeed using stealth. The British spearheaded the formation of the Council of Europe on May 5, 1949. The Treaty of London claimed to only establish trade ties between European nations, like NAFTA or GATT in North America. Its true intention was the formation of a European superstate. In 1954, the elite of the planet met in secret at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Holland. The Bilderberg Group would later admit that their mission was the formation of the EU. Once the EU was established, under the guise of trade deals, a North American Union and Asian Union would be formed. The three interlocking superstates formed the core of the global government, while the United Nations would serve as a world regulatory and enforcement body over the Third World subregions. The Bilderberg Group consists of the heads of all of the managing roundtable groups that steer individual countries. Picture the elite power structure of the world as a giant pyramid, with only the elite of the elite at the tip top of the capstone. The group has been so secretive that until the mid-1980s, the controlled corporate media denied its existence. Into the late 1990s, coverage only consisted of rare one-line mentions. With the rise of the alternative media, their stranglehold on information has begun to slip.
On the outskirts of the national capital today, black limousines with darkened windows converged on a hotel where private security guards imposed ironclad control. The limos carried royalty, political power brokers, and industrial titans to a secret meeting that will last all weekend. It's known as the Bilderberg Group. Could their objective be world domination?
Last week, the head of the country's central bank floated the idea of dumping the greenback as the world's reserve currency, replacing it with an international currency.
Thousands of people gathered to hear Barack Obama deliver key foreign policy speech on his current European tour. His vision for America's place in a new world order.
Returning vets could be a risk to our nation.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
And one of the ways it will drive the change is through global governance.
I think a new world order is emerging.
This is a hoax and a scam which is designed to transfer wealth and power from the private sector to the government sector and from the government of the United States to a world government.
And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
Conspiracy theorists.
They've been crazy, but now they're right.
And who got the money? Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Tell us who they are.
No.
You know, financial terrorism. They have the ability to tweak the knob.
I am proposing that the Federal Reserve be granted new authority.
It's the World Wrestling Federation. It's the Washington Wrestling Federation. They put on this show that they're bitter rivalries, villains, and they really don't like each other. But behind closed doors, they buddy up for a drink and make deals.
Both the Republican and Democratic parties are owned by the same global elites. And on issues that matter to those global elites, they act as one.
There's one puppet master that controls the left, and there's the same puppet master controls the right. They control the Republican Party, and they control the Democratic Party.
This is not a party issue. This is not a left-right issue. The question is, who should government serve? And it should serve the people.
In fact, government is just a tool of the dominant minority that uses economics and government law to enforce upon the public various mandates.
The right-left paradigm in the U.S. and in U.S. politics is taken directly from the commercial world and the corporate world. In the business world, you have Coke, Pepsi. You have McDonald's, Burger King. You've got AT&T and Verizon. You've got duopolies. And a duopoly gives the illusion of there being some competition and some choice. And it looks a little bit better than a monopoly. So, for example, in Communist Russia, if they had Communist Russia Red and Communist Russia Chartreuse, there would have been the illusion of choice and something akin to democracy in Russia. But they simply said, forget it, we're just going to go with red. In the U.S., they have this left-right paradigm, which unfortunately, it doesn't take them out of the hard, cold fact that there is no choice. There's no social justice.
So in the old days, you used to have this globe that with 180 some odd countries, and a few of those countries had a lot of power, like the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States at various times. But today, you might better look at that globe and say that it's surrounded by huge clouds swirling around the planet. They know no national boundaries. They don't follow any specific sets of laws, and these are the big corporations. They basically control politicians around the world because they have all the money, and politicians always need money to get elected or to run their governments if they're not democratically elected politicians. They control the mainstream press, either through outright ownership or advertising budgets. They have massive amounts of lobbyists in Washington that have tremendous influence on our president and Congress. And they really are calling the shots. They form partnerships with the Chinese and the Taiwanese and the Tibetans, or with the Israelis and Arab nations, with Brazilians and Indians, with whatever country and whatever group of people has resources that they covet. And so for the first time in history, we really have this new form of an empire.
We don't want to live under a world government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporation.
This move to world government is not about roses and happiness and peace and a better life. It's about enslavement.
We economic hitmen really have been the ones responsible for creating this first truly global empire. And we work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, industrial parks, ports, things that benefit a few rich people in that country, in addition to our corporations, but really don't help the majority of the people at all. However, those people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt. It's such a big debt they can't repay it, and that's part of the plan, that they can't repay it. And so at some point, we economic hitmen go back to them and say, listen, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debt, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Allow us to build a military base in your country, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world like Iraq, or vote with us on the next UN vote, to have their electric utility company privatized and their water and sewage system privatized and sold to U.S. corporations or other multinational corporations. So there was that whole mushrooming thing, and it's so typical of the way the IMF and the World Bank work, that you put a country in debt, it's such a big debt it can't pay it, and then you offer to refinance that debt and pay even more interest. And you demand this quid pro quo, which you call a conditionality or good governance, which means basically that they've got to sell off their resources, including many of their social services, their utility companies, their school systems sometimes, their penal systems, their insurance systems, to foreign corporations. So it's a double, triple, quadruple whammy. And in that way, we've really created an empire, but we've done it very, very subtly. It's clandestine. All the empires of the past were built on the military. And everybody knew they were building them. So the British knew they were building them, the French, the Germans, the Romans, the Greeks. And they were proud of it. And they always had some excuse, like spreading civilization, spreading some religion, something like that. But they knew they were doing it. We don't. The majority of the people in the United States have no idea that we're living off the benefits of a clandestine empire. That today there's more slavery in the world than ever before. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if it's an empire, then who's the emperor? Obviously, our presidents of the United States are not emperors. An emperor is someone who's not elected, doesn't serve a limited term, and doesn't report to anyone, essentially. So you can't classify our presidents that way. But we do have what I consider to be the equivalent of the emperor, and it's what I call the corporatocracy. The corporatocracy is this group of individuals who run our biggest corporations, and they really act as the emperor of this empire. They control our media, either through direct ownership or advertising. They control most of our politicians because they finance their campaigns, either through their corporations or through personal contributions that come out of the corporations. They're not elected, they don't serve a limited term, they don't report to anybody. And at the very top of the corporatocracy, you really can't tell whether a person's working for a private corporation or the government because they're always moving back and forth. So, you've got a guy who one moment is the president of a big construction company like Halliburton, and the next moment he's vice president of the United States, or the president who is in the oil business. And this is true whether you've got Democrats or Republicans in the office. You have to moving back and forth through the revolving door. And in a way, Our government is invisible a lot of the time, and its policies are carried out by our corporations on one level or another. And then again, the policies of the government are basically forged by the corporatocracy and then presented to the government. They become government policy. So it's an incredibly cozy relationship.
This process of manipulation by the corporatocracy through the use of debt, bribery, and political overthrow is called globalization.
Globalization has economically destroyed the world. You've got at least 40 to 50,000 people who die every day worldwide from starvation, malnutrition, and diseases which can be cured for pennies, such as diarrhea. And if you ask one of these Malthusian oligarchs, don't you think that something should be done to raise the standard of living in Africa or South Asia? They'll say, no, we can't do that. That would wound the planet. That would oppress Mother Earth. So that's oligarchy. Class consciousness in this sense is absolutely essential. If you think that bankers are the same as you, you're wrong. F. Scott Fitzgerald once told Hemingway, you know, the rich are different from us. And Hemingway said, yeah, they have more money. And F. Scott Fitzgerald replied, no, it's something much deeper. It's a whole different world. To be an oligarch, to be a Rockefeller or something of this sort, means that you're in a completely different world with values which are the reverse of human values. Now, if you allow the oligarchs to continue to dominate, the destruction of world civilization is a matter of a few decades at the very, very most. So, choose.
To force their agenda through, the elites are employing one of their favorite tools, artificial crisis creation, also known as the Hegelian dialectic of problem-reaction-solution.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
The Earth's ruling elite are first and foremost monopoly men. The founder of the Rockefeller clan summed it up simply when he said, competition is a sin.
Rockefeller himself said that competition was a sin. And people quipped at that thinking it was one of his little jokes. He made many jokes about saving pennies and stuff like this. But in reality, he was telling you a truth, that competition to a man like him, who worked for a much larger organization, competition truly was a sin. And the cartels that have been formed ever since have become much bigger, more powerful cartels which can literally command governments, sometimes to go to war on their behalf, have occurred.
We're going into the greatest depression. There will be no job growth. Unemployment will continue to escalate. Along with it, so too will crime, poverty, kidnappings, boss snappings. And the more things spin out of control, the harder the hammer is going to come down by the federal government to keep everyone in control.
Power is much, much more important to them than money is. Money is only a way to the means. Power is the end result.
The elite's main goal is to destroy national sovereignty and individual independence. To consolidate their grip on power, the banksters create artificial debt bubbles that are mathematically impossible to pay back.
These are those sinister, toxic assets, the complex financial instruments that they talk about but never really name. They're paper based on paper. They're credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed securities, asset-backed securities, structured investment vehicles, auction rate securities, and so on down the line. It's an immense mass of cancerous, fictitious, speculative paper, bloated in value, impossible to bail out. Triage the derivatives on their books. There's no way to bail out a $1.5 quadrillion black hole of derivatives, but nevertheless they try.
The world that maybe some people dreamt of at that conference back in Bournemouth, when it looked as if maybe history would end, that liberal democracy would triumph, that free market economics would slowly progress, and we'd have a new world order.
And together they helped to create, were the principal leaders in creating, a new world order and a winning strategy in the Cold War.
We are part of a new world order. And as the recently departed Admiral William J. Crowe once said, It's long on new, and it's short on order.
Walter Isaacson wrote a wonderful book about some of the wise men who helped shape the New World Order following the Second World War.
As we devise a way forward in Iraq, I urge the international community to embrace its responsibility for creating that new world order. A new world order based upon collective action.
The transatlantic partnership was never just the foundation of our security. It was the foundation of our way of life. It was forged an experience of the most bitter and anguished kind. Out of it came a new Europe, a new world order, a new consensus as to how life should and could be lived.
And just like that, it was gone. It was a new world order. That's what President George H. Bush said. Harvard historian Francis Fukuyama pronounced the end of history.
What's interesting and dangerous about the New World Order is that it's not a natural progressing idea. It's just not civilization naturally evolving and organizing into this system. It's the group of extremely powerful people that are manipulating the system to get it to this status from behind the scenes without anybody's knowledge. You have to ask yourself, if there isn't an agenda going on to keep those organizations quiet and to keep them out of the news, to keep the discussions about them behind closed doors, then why is it that these supposed experts on the left and on the right never talk about them?
This has been a condensed history of the globalist organizations and their rise to power. But is there a reason they meet behind closed doors? A shadow world government has been mentioned, but to truly understand what that means, let's go back to this iconic warning from President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Progress toward these noble goals is persistently threatened by the conflict now engulfing the world. It commands our whole attention, absorbs our very beings. We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method. Unhappily, the danger it poses promises to be of indefinite duration. The need to maintain balance in and among national programs. Balance between the private and the public economy. Balance between the cost and hoped for advantages. Balance between the clearly necessary and the comfortably desirable. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
America went into a major mobilization, revived its defense industries, and we saw the civilian economy of America more and more skewed through the 50s. Already in Eisenhower's time, he could see it coming, that you were getting a larger and larger defense military component of the economy, which, unlike the rest of the economy, was very, very centrally organized about lobbying for more and more new weapons. It was the political skills of this military-industrial complex, which I think Eisenhower was really warning us about, and rightly. There is a military-industrial complex. Today we see a situation where the civilian economy is really in tatters, and most of our civilian production has gone overseas to third world countries. What do we export? Our biggest export practically is garbage, but apart from garbage, we export military equipment. We have a special act which subsidizes, makes it possible for countries abroad to buy our armaments because it's too expensive to produce them for one country only. So we have become a very efficient military-industrial complex, but the civilian economy is only a ghost of what it used to be, and this has terrible consequences for democracy because it means that the power of this lobby is now sort of dominating what goes on in Washington.
Through multinational corporations, global intelligence networks, out-of-control banksters, all under the veil of national security and black operations, the global elite have consolidated power on a massive scale over the last several decades. You see, global corporations not only fund and develop large technological and military projects here and abroad, they also own the consumer industry and production, as well as all of the important media. By owning the vast majority of what we hear and see on a daily basis, we have been manipulated on a mass scale as to regards to what we believe and desire, both socially and politically. Edward Bernays, the nephew of world-famous psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, would study group dynamics and become the father of public relations. He authored the book Propaganda in 1928. In it, he described how to intelligently and consciously manipulate the habits and opinions of the masses within a democratic society. He went on to state that those who harness this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government and are the true ruling power. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world.
The average American is distracted, mindless, worried about minuscule things, celebrities, as if it was their own family members. And this is by design, because the powers that be, who own the media, know how our brains work. They know scientifically how the human mind functions. They know about sociology, and they are using the media, and have used the media for decades now, to entertain people with issues that don't really matter. When you have the big news networks covering celebrity issues as if it's the most important thing, it becomes the most important thing. And this is not by accident. This is to keep us out of the way. Because if you're worried about the latest celebrity death, or the latest celebrity couple, or the celebrity breakup, or your sports team having a shot at the Super Bowl or the World Series, there's so much information about those issues that can be discussed that will mesmerize people, and they won't know or care about the real issues that are out there.
Well, I think this is just one more piece of evidence of the degree to which the media, supposedly the watchdogs, has become the gatekeeper of the system.
Mainstream media are, first of all, nearly all of them corporations, nearly all of them now publicly held, part of the whole Wall Street financial system that they're supposed to report about objectively, but they can't. They, right now, in October of 2009, they are celebrating the recovery of the biggest banks in New York and saying that the recession is over. Of course, there are a few problems, like foreclosures are going on, unemployment is rising. All of this is affecting the American people, but it's not affecting the financial elite who also control the media.
Bernays successfully identified the invisible empire which controlled the minds of men. So as the populace is mesmerized and hypnotized by powerful behind-the-scenes forces, as they are distracted by the latest celebrity scandal, the newest cell phone, and their favorite sports team, this network disguises itself, remaining in the shadows.
Most societies have an elite tries to stay in power. And the ways they stay in power is not merely by controlling the means of production, to be Marxist, i.e. controlling the money, but by controlling the cognitive map, the way we think. And what really matters in that respect is not so much what is actually said in public, but is what is left undebated, unsaid.
For centuries, gatekeepers have manipulated our cognitive map. But in 1989, a computer scientist by the name of Tim Berners-Lee implemented the first successful communication between an HTTP client and server. The World Wide Web was born. It has since unleashed a tsunami of instantly accessible, freely available information. Just as Gutenberg's printing press wrestled control of the cognitive map away from an ecclesiastical and royal elite, today the internet is beginning to change governments, finance and the media. We are at the cusp of change. But to enact it, we must first understand the things that have been left unsaid for so long. To do that, we need context from people who speak the truth in the face of collective delusion, because to understand something is to be liberated from it.
The end of World War II, we had 50% of the world's gross domestic product. We were making 54,000 airplanes a year, 7,000 ships, etc., etc. And we were the new Rome. And we recognized it and devised a power management scheme in the 1947 National Security Act to, we thought, manage it. And it worked fairly well during the Cold War. But we haven't done anything since, and I think that's another sign of our inability to grasp the new world, if you will.
Empires do not begin or end on a certain date, but they do end, and the West has not yet come to terms with its fading supremacy. At the end of every empire, under the guise of renewal, tribes, armies and organizations appear and devour the heritage of the former superpower, often from within. In his essay, The Fate of Empires, the soldier, diplomat and traveller Lieutenant General Sir John Glubb analysed the life cycle of empires. He found remarkable similarities between them all. An empire lasts about 250 years, or 10 generations, from the early pioneers to the final conspicuous consumers who become a burden on the state. 6 ages defined the lifespan of an empire. The age of pioneers, the age of conquests, the age of commerce, the age of affluence, the age of intellect, ending with bread and circuses in the age of decadence. There are common features to every age of decadence. An undisciplined, overextended military, the conspicuous display of wealth, a massive disparity between rich and poor, a desire to live off a bloated state, and an obsession with sex. But perhaps the most notorious trait of all is the debasement of the currency. Great empire wealth always dazzles, but beneath the surface the unbridled desire for money, power and material possessions means that duty and public service are replaced by leaders and citizens who scramble for the spoils.
Historically, all the signs of the demise of empire are beginning to develop. Some are more trenchant than others. This current financial and economic crisis, that sort of thing always accompanies the demise of empire.
The people of Rome were constantly being distracted by the gladiatorial events, and the politicians knew that they did this whenever there was unrest among the people. They had a huge event going on, and they created a new event with lots and lots of gladiators, and every day we're doing that. That is a common trait of declining empires. And so today in the United States, for example, you find a tremendous emphasis on all kinds of television programs that distract people from what's really going on. Sports is a big part of that, as it was in gladiator times. In essence, we've been lulled into a lethargy, and we've accepted it.
Just as our sports stars today earn vast sums, so did Roman charioteers. In the 2nd century, one by the name of Gaius Apuleius Diocles amassed a fortune of 35 million sesterces in prize money. equivalent to several billion dollars today.
And this again is typifying the end of an empire, where things were so great, we have this last oomph of momentum that we used to be great, and we felt great, and we don't feel it anymore. So everyone is out searching for it. Well, maybe it's in the best food, or the best clothes, or the best music, or the best movies, or a reality TV show, or another magazine. But you can never get enough of what you don't need. What you need is a strong moral conviction that is pervasive throughout the society, and integrity reigns.
There's a vast apathy. There's a vast amoralism, even a political nature to it. That is to say, there are vast numbers of people who don't give a damn. And so there's this natural, I suppose, entropy. Any living organism, which an empire is, of course, over time dies. Question is, how does it die? Does it die in a violent cascade of events, or does it die over a long period of time?
Human beings are inconsistent and paradoxical. We hope for peace and immortality, but continually invent new ways to destroy each other. We're capable of the kindest, most noble acts and the most horrific atrocities.
Human beings are complex creatures. I mean, for example, we're capable right now, at this minute, of acting in such a way as to make it likely, if not certain, that our grandchildren are going to face terrible disasters. And we're consciously acting to accelerate that likelihood, even though we all love our grandchildren. How can you be more contradictory than that?
In spite of all the economic activities of last 50, 60, 70 years since the Second World War, and all the industrialization, we have not yet managed to solve the problem of poverty, deprivation, hunger, malnutrition. Millions of people every night go to bed without food, and millions of people are throwing away their food. Waste on the one hand, and poverty and deprivation and hunger on the other hand. Malnutrition on the one hand, and obesity on the other hand. What kind of system have we created?
Why, with such brilliant knowledge on the planet, are we still struggling to distribute wealth fairly? How has the human race developed a flawed system of government and economics that serves the few at the expense of the many? And with such poverty in an age of plenty, why have we not had the will to change such a vicious social structure?
Greed is the fundamental kind of ingredients for the immoral economy. The problem is not that there is not enough in the world. People say that there is a poverty, we have to create more wealth. There is enough in the world for everybody's need, as Mahatma Gandhi said, but not for anybody's greed.
But is it just greed, or does it go deeper than that? Is the problem systemic?
It's kind of like when I was working on Wall Street for 7 years, I had the experience some people would have, let's say working at a meat processing plant, they become vegetarian. You know, you work on Wall Street and you see how these banks like Goldman, JP Morgan, these other banks make money. When you see money, it kind of makes you sick.
Well, I think if the people knew what the banking system is up to, as Henry Ford said, there would be a revolution tomorrow morning. The fact is most people think that what a bank does is lend you money that someone else has put in the bank previously. But what a bank actually does, what a commercial bank does, is to create money from nothing and then lend it to you at interest. If I do that, if I manufacture money in my own home, it's called counterfeiting. If an accountant creates money out of nothing in the company accounts, it's called cooking the books. But if a bank does it, it's perfectly legal. And so long as you allow fraud to be legalized, then all kinds of problems are going to pop up in the economic system, which you can't do anything about.
For 3 generations, the world watched the fight between capitalism and communism. But in the 1980s, the Russian economy started to collapse. The Soviet Union capitulated, and so-called capitalism reigned supreme.
Before 1989, we had a battle between communism and the market. And in that battle, there was a sense of, let's not expose the flaws in the market economy. This is too important of a battle that you don't criticize our team while we're fighting their team. And their team, associated with authoritarianism, with a failure to deliver well-being to their society, it was very clear that if you had to choose between these two, which was better?
Communism failed first for various reasons. I think it was inefficient, human rights, lack of respect, so forth. So capitalist West has been continuing in a triumphalist mode, thinking, our adversary has failed, that means we're doing everything right. Both systems are trying to do something which is fundamentally impossible, grow forever. And they're both going to fail. One failed first. Capitalism's going to fail later, or it's failing now.
Over the last 30 or 40 years, capitalism has taken this extreme form. And a lot of it goes back to the economist Milton Friedman from the Chicago School and Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and others buying into these policies that really encourage people to take on huge amounts of debt, encourage privatization, smaller government supposedly, although bigger military, so actually the government spending goes up. Deregulation, getting rid of rules that govern the people who run our institutions, especially our corporations. It's as though we suddenly are supposed to believe that the human beings who sit at the top of corporations don't need to be regulated. They're some sort of gods.
Milton Friedman, his protégés the Chicago Boys, and the neoclassical ideology beat the classical approach to economics and became the framework for what we today call capitalism. There are 2 main competing economic approaches which determine how we humans manage the world and distribute wealth. These are the classical and neoclassical schools. The classical school favours less government interference, more personal autonomy, and recognises that humans cannot function without natural resources. The neoclassical school, which has a more dismissive view of natural resources, thinks government should rule the economy, solve social problems, and leave the free market to look after the distribution of wealth. The neoclassical school emerged around 100 years ago due to vested interests' desire to protect their assets. This meant that neoclassical mathematical models and assumptions were divorced from reality. They're based on what ought to be, instead of the classical models which are based on what actually is. It's these neoclassical models, which favour large corporations, that have been used to legitimise the financialisation of the global economy. Championed by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, neoclassical economics still dominates policy making today.
Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. And in America, for example, the banks that got in trouble got bailed out by the government. That's socialism. And people are arguing against socialism in America, and yet this is probably the most socialist country in the world right now.
We have a system which isn't even a proper capitalist system. Rich people make mistakes, they don't get punished. Poor people make mistakes, they get punished. Yeah? Or even worse, they don't make any mistake and they are forced to pay for the mistakes of the rich.
When the taxpayer is footing the bill for the misplaced speculation of bankers, then suddenly, instead of the economy serving the human being is now in perpetual service to amoral financial organizations.
The Goldman Sachs machine is one of using profits to buy influence in Washington to change laws to make it easier to make money on Wall Street to be used to buy influence in Washington. So it's a self-reinforcing malfeasance machine that is continuing to grow as a parasite in the economy and continuing to kill the host.
Famous for claiming it did God's work, Goldman Sachs is one of the most influential investment banks in the world. Its alumni often occupy positions of great influence in governments and central banks. In September 2008, barely a month before the stock market crash, Goldman, supposedly a pillar of the free market, changed its banking status from investment to commercial. This meant it was now eligible for state protection. Socialism for the rich, right there.
Goldman Sachs are extremely efficient at what they do. Their task is to make money. They make bank robbers like Willie Sutton look like modest amateurs. They're huge bank robbers, but it's legal. The system is set up so that they can do it. In the recent years, they've been selling securities put together from mortgages that they knew were worthless. So they're selling these things to unwitting consumers, making a ton of money on it. Meanwhile, they're betting that they're going to fail because they know that what they're peddling is rotten. So they placed bets with it's called credit default swaps and other things with a huge insurance company, AIG, and that was insuring Goldman Sachs against the failure of the stuff they're peddling.
It was against the holy backdrop of St. Paul's Cathedral in London that Goldman Sachs vice chairman and mouthpiece Lord Griffiths gave insight into how certain bankers really think. The devoted Christian defended extortionate bonuses.
I'm not a person of despair, I'm a person of hope. And I think that we have to tolerate the inequality as a way to achieving greater prosperity and opportunity for all.
The fundamental Christian view, and I would say of Islam as well, and certainly of Judaism, is that wealth is to be shared. Money has to be shared. You can't take it with you. And from that develops a whole lot of stuff about justice and the economy and so on. And we've lost that, and instead we've got people accumulating more and more. And I just think it's disgusting that people have lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they can't pay their mortgages from bankers who made a big mistake and then paid enormous bonuses. I'm sorry, that is simply wrong. And I can't understand why we are not more vociferous about that.
When rich people tell you that they specifically have to be rich through these egregious rip-off mechanisms, that's just self-serving propaganda and it should be disregarded.
But the public are now confused as to why our political leaders have allowed this to happen, and quite naturally now ask why.
Because our political processes are badly flawed. They're badly flawed because of the dependence on lobbyists, on campaign contributions. So that's why, my view and a view I think of a lot of people is that we have to restructure our political processes to give more voice to the ordinary citizen and less voice to the interest group, to the moneyed groups, to those who have taken such a large role in shaping our tax code, our regulatory regulations, and so forth.
The first financial beneficiary of America's foreign policy is the military, in particular those who supply it with arms and equipment. The military has won wars, but how successful has it been in its bigger aim to eradicate terrorism? After the military, the next financial beneficiary are those who win the contracts to conduct the rebuilding process. In the West, people might even feel optimistic when they hear that the US is pumping tens of billions of newly created dollars into developing nations to build infrastructure. But often this too doesn't seem to achieve the publicized goals. Is there another reason we give these countries aid?
We economic hitmen have created the world's first truly global empire, and we've done it primarily without the military. We work many different ways, but perhaps the most common is that we'll take a third world country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. However, the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our own corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, highways, industrial parks, things that benefit a few wealthy families in that country as well as our corporations, but don't help the majority of the people at all. They're too poor to buy electricity or drive cars on the highways. They don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks, but they're left holding a huge debt.
Infrastructure which has used heavy loans from the World Bank and IMF and made from grants from Western countries, they've all gone into benefiting the elite and the feudal classes. They have not benefited the people.
A lot of money goes to these consultants and companies from the West who charge huge amounts of money, and actually the real money on projects and on ordinary people is very limited. The masses have very little already. So those landlords who have the infrastructure and who are going to make money because of the infrastructure that is built through their roads, they will prosper. But the ones who don't have any resources, they've not had jobs, there isn't an economic activity for them in terms of manufacturing goods so they can sell and they can also prosper. When you don't have that, what do? They resort to joining the Taliban.
Is it any wonder developed nations are fighting in underdeveloped countries when so many are making so much money out of it, without ever really having to face up to or even witness the consequences of their actions?
So what if 5 million kids died in Africa because of debt last year? I got a bonus of £1 million, and if I have that conversation, I've had it with some bankers who've been in the business a long time.
What does the word terrorist actually mean? Many terrorists would sooner describe themselves as freedom fighters. Could it be that the charge of terrorism could just as easily be made against Western corporations, speculators and policymakers? As long as banking empires chase infrastructure and debt deals in pursuit of profit, the West will continue to export injustice through finance. Millions more will be displaced. Terrorism will thrive, and neo-colonialism will continue to end more and more lives around the world.
We've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. We've got to stabilize population on a voluntary basis. Everybody in the world's got to pledge to themselves that 1 or 2 children is it. Not doing it will be catastrophic. We'll have 8 degrees. We'll be 8 degrees hotter in 30 or 40 years, and basically none of the crops will grow. Most of the people will have died, and the rest of us will be cannibals. Civilization will have broken down. What the few people who are left will be living in a failed state like Somalia or Sudan, and living conditions will be intolerable. The droughts will be so bad there'll be no more corn growing. Not doing it is suicide.
Unbelievably, when Turner met with other globalists, David Rockefeller, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Michael Bloomberg, and even Oprah Winfrey to discuss population control, they were portrayed as superheroes. Would a superhero call for a one-child policy? Would a superhero call for population control? In a recent interview, he claims that 2 billion people would be ideal. That means 4 billion plus must die to accommodate a man who owns more acreage than anyone else on the planet. Let's not forget that Ted Turner is the president of the United Nations Foundation. There are countless examples of how we are being indoctrinated to accept these kind of conditions and believe that man and his activities are the problem. The New World Order will stop at nothing to achieve planetary dominance, whether it be assassination, wars based on lies, and even a phony environmental movement. So it should come as no surprise that they have been tracking, tracing, and databasing our lives for years. Many people are aware that the Bush administration engaged in warrantless wiretaps on American citizens. What they don't understand is that it has come out in court that all the major telecommunications companies have been secretly storing every piece of data received from our phones and our computers and handing them over to the National Security Agency.
You heard about the government secretly listening in on phone conversations without a warrant. But there is evidence that your email is also being tapped. The government has been intercepting most emails as part of its terrorist surveillance program. That program has been criticized as illegal because it's missing an important ingredient: search warrants. Several years ago, Klein says he came to suspect that AT&T had installed secret computer gear designed to spy on internet traffic at the request of the National Security Agency.
This is just a small part of the picture, as AT&T was not the only company involved and emails were not the only issue. The NSA was installing Norris Insight systems, which are capable of monitoring billions of bits of internet traffic per second. It was also able to monitor any calls trafficked through its system, all websites visited, all instant messaging, and separate types of transaction records.
The secret room at AT&T contains gear which enables the government to look at every individual message on the internet and analyze exactly what people are doing. Here's another document. It mentions a company called Norris. Norris makes computer software that can swallow and analyze 10 gigabytes of information every second. That means it could go through all the information in all the books in the Library of Congress in a little over 15 minutes.
The documents Klein and others were able to produce were then censored by the NSA.
Bankston isn't allowed to talk about the documents in detail. The government has since had them sealed. But he says what is in there boggles the mind.
We are talking about a substantial portion of all the communications traffic in the United States.
Living in the New World Order, when it's close to completion, for the average citizen, for people like you and me, is going to be essentially slavery. We're never going to be able to get ahead. We're never going to be able to amass enough wealth, essentially to retire or to do what we want to do in life. We're going to constantly be working for the man. They're creating essentially a two-class system. So it's going to be an inner ruling elite and then everyone else. And I got news for you. You're everyone else.
The New World Order that is currently being built revolves around creating a global technopoly ruled by the elite, in which they dominate and control a severely reduced populace, which they treat as their pets. In the New World Order, the people are the enemy. This document is one of literally thousands that make everyone a possible terrorist. This establishes a pattern of demonizing ordinary citizens while giving draconian powers to the state. You are considered guilty until proven innocent. As technology is developed, separate parts of their command and control system are beta tested around the world. In the United Kingdom, it has been established there are over 4 million CCTV cameras. That is around 1 camera for every 14 citizens. Their purpose is not to solve crime, as it takes 1,000 CCTV cameras to solve just one crime. It is to create a tattletale society in which everyone is under constant surveillance by the state and those around them. The company Internet Eyes is now paying people to log on to the internet and watch CCTV cameras in real time as they turn in criminals for cash. Families deemed by the state to be unfit in England have now been put under 24-hour CCTV supervision in their homes. This program has plans for 20,000 families in England, which is to double in the next 2 years. Your every move in both your home and the outside world is under constant surveillance by a criminal elite who operate above the law. As we are constantly under the microscope, their activities remain in the shadows.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
People are awfully forgiving, or they just don't understand, what's been done to them.
We are at an epochal shift. We're at a point where the West could tip into complacent and quite well off redundancy, or we could play a decisive role in the future.
What the banks did was reprehensible. That was why there was the outrage at the greed of the bankers when we gave them money that was supposed to help them lend to others, but they decided to use that money to pay themselves bonuses. For what? For record losses?
We are governed by corporations today, often by corporations that don't have very much interest in the United States of America.
We are entering the age of consequence. A rapacious financial system, escalating organized violence, abject poverty for billions, and the looming environmental fallout are all converging at a time when governments, religion, and mainstream economists have stalled. War, conquest, famine, and death. Over centuries, systems have been subtly modified, manipulated, and even corrupted, often to serve the interests of the few. We have continually accepted these changes, and because man can adjust to living under virtually any conditions, the trait that's enabled us to survive is the very trait that has suppressed us.
One of the most powerful cultural frameworks that shapes the way we think today in the West is the Hollywood film construction. And it follows a particular cultural pattern in that there is a beginning, there is a middle and an end, there is drama, tension, there's resolution, there's usually a goodie and a baddie, and there's usually a story told through the medium of human beings. This Hollywoodization of the way that people communicate and the way they tell stories about themselves and view their recent history has very much impacted how we look at the financial crisis. in that people look at the beginning, the middle and the end. They look at the drama around Lehman Brothers, and they wanted, say, a resolution, and they wanted baddies, they wanted sacrificial victims as well. So people have focused on a few individuals, and the idea that somehow it wasn't just one or two individuals who were at the root of the problem, it was a systemic problem, that actually almost everyone who participated was in some way guilty, either of outright negligence or simply failing to ask the right questions, or simply failing to ask why money was so cheap for so many years. The idea that it was a systemic flaw is something which is very hard for people to grasp, and even harder to depict as a good story.
Perhaps there is this feeling of helplessness because we don't understand what the real problem actually is. Cleansing a few bad apples will not rectify the flaws at the heart of the Western economic system. A system that should be protecting people is in fact the very thing that's enabling our four horsemen to ride with such vengeance. The modern-day four horsemen: a rapacious financial system, escalating organized violence, abject poverty for billions, and the exhaustion of the Earth's resources, are riding roughshod over those who can least afford it. They gallop unchallenged because the cognitive map that's been put in place by our schools, universities, and our media does not encourage us to question accepted norms. Instead, there is apathy.
In a sense, I think we're rather depressed societies. We've got used to the idea that there's nothing that can be done. There is no alternative, that, we're never going to deal with these environmental problems, and we live in a dog-eat-dog society, and that's it. I think what we have to take away from this is a recognition that most of these problems can be very substantially improved by making our societies more equal, reducing the income differences, and that also helps us to solve the environmental problems. We can reach a society that is qualitatively better for all of us.
Well, the apathy is sort of engineered because you don't have any discussion of this in the public media, hardly by surprise. The public media are owned by the real estate and the financial interests, and they're not going to explain to people the integration between the financial, insurance, and real estate sectors, the FIRE sector.
One source of this disinformation is the neoclassical school of economics. These economists and academics have been successful in convincing the world that their models were gospel. But just as Gutenberg's printing press was revolutionary in the 16th century, today we're at the dawn of internet enlightenment, which will remove the cloud of ignorance upheld by academic and media gatekeepers. Education can be a form of mass mind control, and it's astonishing that today neoclassical economics continues to be taught in all Ivy League universities.
I do get letters from students in economics departments at other universities. They're into some graduate program or something, and they say, John, I just read such and such that you wrote, and this is the kind of thing that interests me. I'm stuck in this program here in which, I can't even talk about any of that. What's your advice? What should I do? What they're teaching you is what you're going to have to oppose. A lot of it. I mean, some of it's useful, but so some of it's useful, go ahead and learn it. And the other reason for learning the rest of it is know your enemy.
An individual might not be able to change the system, but they can change themselves. If we're not offered proper education, we must begin our own. And a good place to start is to become reacquainted with the classical economists, and with something that so few question, but that affects us all, our system of money.
If the monetary system of the world is not reformed, then we are headed towards the end of industrial civilization. I won't say that we're going to the end of humanity, but it's just going to be an absolute collapse of our world as we have known it, because it cannot function on fiat money. And none of those who are responsible for this want to admit it, but that is the fact.
The fiat system of money is a man-made law, and it's been abused. Is there a form of money whose law is not set by man?
When you look at natural law and gold,
I sort of describe gold as being a natural form of money. All of the gold that's been mined throughout history still exists in its above ground stock. It's about the size of 2.5 Olympic swimming pools if you put all that gold together in one place. The key is that this above ground stock of gold grows by about 1 3/4% per annum, which is approximately equal to new world population growth, and is approximately equal to new wealth creation. So as the net result of this is that you have this very good consistency in gold's purchasing power over long periods of time, because the supply-demand equation is very much in balance. To achieve human liberty, you really need to have sound money, and gold is the only way to do that, because only gold is outside of the control of politicians.
With modern man-made monetary processes, a chronic excess of debt has built up at every level of society. Debt is now regarded as normal. It isn't. It's a form of slavery. But how much do we question our debt? And what should we now do about it? Our system of taxation also needs addressing. Currently, we're taxed on what we produce. Perhaps it would be more progressive to tax what we consume. How many American people realize that the Founding Fathers never intended Americans to be taxed on their labor? In other words, they weren't meant to pay income tax. The tax system that was exported from Britain, a relic of colonialism, has duped the world.
The most important element of a tax system is to do what everybody expected to be done in the 19th century, and that is to base the tax system on land taxation, on the free lunch of land value, and on what John Stuart Mill called the unearned increment, the income that landlords made in their sleep, as he put it.
This tax system, advocated by all the classical economists, would begin to address global poverty, as it would allow citizens in developing countries to keep their resource wealth. In developed countries, it would begin to address our housing and debt crisis, and unleash the kind of entrepreneurship needed to refloat our economies. Perhaps we should also resurrect another timeless principle for workers that was promoted during the Industrial Revolution.
Well, the idea that people who work in a plant ought to own it is just deeply built into working class culture. So right around here at the early Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, working people simply took for granted that, yes, of course, the workers should own the mills in which they work. Anything else is an attack on our fundamental rights as free citizens. They also took for granted that wage labor is hardly different from slavery. It's different only because it's temporary, and then you can be free. One of the ways you can be free is by owning your own plants. That was not an exotic view. That was Abraham Lincoln's view. In fact, it was a principle of the Republican Party in the late 19th century. It's taken a lot of effort to drive those ideas out of people's heads, but they're still there, and they are very relevant.
It was the Greek philosopher Plato who said the ratio of earnings between highest and lowest paid employee in any organization should be no more than 6-1. In 1923, banker J.P. Morgan declared no more than 20-1 was optimum. Yet today's salary difference between top and bottom earners in global corporations can be higher than 500 or 1,000-1.
When you're up in the range of 500-1 inequality, the rich and the poor become almost different species, no longer members of the same community. Commonality of interest is lost. And so it's difficult to form community and to have good, friendly relationships across class differences that are that large.
When the public do vent their outrage at inappropriate earnings, the common defence is to move the debate to the psychological realm and quote mercurial British economist Herbert Spencer. He coined the phrase survival of the fittest, and his words are now used to justify excess. Competition in business is a good thing, but the playing field must be level. Monopolists have too much because the system they game is rigged. Under the current economic setup, the fitness of the vast majority of the world's population is irrelevant. Those that are made to pay for this crisis are not those that caused it. but those who caused it for survival. We've endured the so-called free market for centuries, but far from being free, it's led us to destroy nature and each other in a vain attempt to progress.
It's absolutely ludicrous to suggest that somehow there is a scientifically defined boundary of the market that we should never change. And of course, that's what the free market economy wants you to believe. Because once they convince you of that and claim that, on top of that, claim that they have the truth because they are PhDs in economics, then they can tell you whatever they want, and then you'll have to accept it. But that's where we have to take these guys on. Politics is about drawing the boundary of the market. When you think about it, a lot of things have been taken out of the market over the last 2-3 centuries. 2-3 centuries ago, you could buy and sell human beings, child labor, a lot of things that you wouldn't imagine you could buy and sell today. So, over time, we have redrawn this boundary, and there's nothing wrong with redrawing the boundary again.
Things that were considered absolutely reasonable in the 1850s, like selling any chemical on a street corner and telling you that it's a pharmaceutical drug that will be good for you, things like that were absolutely commonplace then, are now serious criminal offences. Well, the same thing will be true of active money management in 100 years.
The breakdown we saw in the Great Depression and witnessed again at the beginning of the 21st century occurred because in the name of growth, much was taken out of the system by those who contribute very little. Multinational corporates and banks will always want to grow without having to compensate those people who actually do the work to produce the surplus. In the past, every time too much was taken by those who contributed little, people rose up to halt the violent practices enacted by a tangible enemy. Whatever the propaganda, at the beginning of the 21st century, central banks' unregulated cheap money pumped up land values, which created an unsustainable asset bubble in a world that once again operates a rigged tax system that enriches entrenched privilege. Neoclassical economics have ruined life for the bottom billions, tempted everyone into intergenerational conflict, and created massive suffering that has no limits. Human beings go mad in crowds and come to their senses slowly and individually. History is littered with examples of people who threw themselves off the yoke of oppression to adopt radical change, only to end up with popular new rulers that maintain the status quo. To really understand something is to be liberated from it. Dedicating oneself to a great cause, taking responsibility, and gaining self-knowledge is the essence of being human. A predatory capitalist's truest enemy and humanity's greatest ally is the self-educated individual who has read, understood, delays their gratification, and walks around with their eyes wide open.
The planet is being destroyed all around us. Using money to try to address that problem, it's shooting yourself in the foot. Evolve or perish, grow up or die. An entirely new level of human consciousness is needed right now, or we're all dead. Mankind openly descends into a world of bloodshed without end. Dog eat dog until everything is killed and the last man commits suicide or is poisoned, having all the toys, and they mean nothing.
Of the City of Pittsburgh Chief Police, I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly. I order all those assembled to immediately disperse.
The police aren't arming themselves, they're being armed. It's a giveaway. And this came with the Patriot Act. It was totally, patently unconstitutional. Absolutely. That should have then prompted a revolution among the American people. as I read the Patriot Act, what I said was, oh my God, Katie, bar the door. This is the federal government taking over every police department in the country. All of a sudden, these taps were open. All this money started flowing to local police agencies. But the deal was every police agency had to use a uniform government computer system that CIA or the FBI could get into. It used to be that if I ran a sheriff's office out here, the FBI couldn't get into my computers. But now with the software techniques, the U.S. government not only can get into any law enforcement agency's computers, they can shut them down. Radio frequencies were synchronized. Standardization of weapons and issues of all that was done with the intent to turn American police departments into a de facto army with the same equipment, the same radio frequencies for the purpose of command and control and information control. So that's pretty much been accomplished so that as we reach the point where we're at now, where everything is falling apart, you know, no county sheriff anywhere is going to turn down an armored vehicle, you know, but there are strings that come with all of that. So we see Department of Homeland Security buying 4 million rounds of hollow point ammunition, handgun ammunition. That's to shoot Americans. And I stay away from some of the very unfounded, hysterical right-wing conspiracies, but it's a very clear fact that the United States government has declared the American people to be the enemy. Americans could be jailed under NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, a couple of years ago, without trial indefinitely anywhere in the world. That's why the Constitution has been shredded, torn up, and thrown away. The great flaw of the Occupy movement was that it couldn't focus on a specific demand. The energy behind the Occupy movement, much the same as with the Arab Spring, was an absolute total inability to accept the obvious criminality that was ruling everything and destroying everything at the time. The fatal flaw of Occupy was that it couldn't come to a clear focus as to what was needed, because the consciousness had not evolved to the point where you could focus on a list of demands. The beauty, the power of Occupy, which is why Department of Homeland Security had to destroy it, was that in the Occupy camps, a zone of consciousness was created, and the human learning curve was accelerating rapidly. In other words, the awareness, people were coming to awareness very, very quickly about what the real issues were. And that's what scared Homeland Security and Barack Obama and the U.S. government and the banks on Wall Street terribly. What was produced as a result of Occupy? Not much, but now we see the American people now afraid taking to the streets after the brutal crackdown across all of Occupy. And the United States empire is crumbling as we speak. Now, what's clear is, because the U.S. has been the hegemonic alpha dog for so long, is that the world doesn't have a plan B for what happens if the United States fails. But the United States of America needs to fail. The U.S. dollar needs to fail. There is no hope for any of us unless that oppression, that straitjacket, that iron mask in which we are forced to live is removed. And we have to see that. The U.S. dollar is like one of the major legs that must be broken down to change that consciousness about money. It's like Chief Seattle said, not until you have killed the last fish and cut down the last tree and poisoned the last river will you discover that you cannot eat money. So now the dollar is collapsing. The U.S. empire is in retreat. The world doesn't quite know what to do, and this was discussed clearly when I went to Moscow in 2001 with the Ministry of Finance. consciousness has not evolved to the point where people realize that money is nothing. It's not money is the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. The belief that it's power. You know, here's the cruelest joke. And I can hear George Orwell and Terence McKenna laughing their asses off. What does it say on here? In God we trust. This is God. This is the God that's dying. This is the fucking God that means nothing. It's not clean air. It's not fresh water. In the world that we live in right fucking now, the hypnosis is going to break. Because everybody's going to realize almost in a heartbeat, what matters is, do you have food to eat? Do you have unpolluted water that you can drink? Do you have air that you can breathe? Are you able to maintain your body temperature at night? And at that point, the switches go on, and mankind is faced one of two choices. That's it. When the dollar goes, it's going to be a very, very short period of time before it comes to that real fork in the road. What I'm aware of, people who had been unapproachable before, people whose consciousness was like the people living in the Matrix where you were Neo out of the Matrix, okay? It's hard to deal with, but I see people in the Matrix starting to crack. And that's satisfying. I've been waiting 35 fucking years to see these cracks appear. There are too many people who have been hypnotized into believing their food actually comes from a grocery store. It doesn't come from a grocery store. It comes from Mother Earth.
Don't ever use conspiracy theory that's so insulting. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's real. It's science. It's documented. I'm not going to come from the defensive standpoint on this. There are more people in this country who are aware of the dangers of fucking GMOs than who are ignorant. And I'm not going to come from the standpoint of talking to the people who are ignorant. I just don't do it. GMOs are poison. Genetically modified organisms intended to make a profit. Once the genome, the DNA, could be modified, the corporations said, well, if you modify it, then you can get a patent on it and you can own it. And everything that uses that patent, you get profit for. That's life. That's life. You can't patent life. You're not patentable, nor am I. But the way GMO laws work, essentially, is to argue that if you and I ingest GMO corn, or most people are eating a whole lot more GMO than they realize, that could modify your cells, and you then could become the profit of the corporation. The property of the corporation, under that logic. I'm serious, man. I am so serious. There are billions of people in the world, man, who are out of the paradigm. They're out of the matrix. They've taken the red pill, and they don't jump back in to argue with the matrix. So that's for the testiness of my response. There's a lot of awake people out here. We ain't buying this bullshit anymore. Why do we have to? It's obvious why GMOs are dangerous, just as obvious why it is that fracking is dangerous. And for people who can't see that, we're not apologetic to you. We just kind of feel sorry for you. Monsanto is getting its ass kicked around the world. Romania, Mexico has just banned all GMO corn. I mean, this is happening boom, 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 boom around the world the same way it's happening with fracking. And I'm on that side, you know. If nobody should ever ask me to have to explain why it's necessary to defend my life.
Commercial meat is the most disrespectful way to treat an animal. Not only are they raised and slaughtered in inhumane conditions, they're fed all kinds of drugs, they're fed toxins that pass on to the human body. They're not organic meaning chemical free. What's important to preserve is the clear relationship with nature that's unfettered by man-made interference. You know, it's man's improvements, it's man techno-fixes that have created all the problems we're facing in the world right now. Oh, they'll just come up with some new fix for this, and all they do is make stuff worse.
Until the human race realizes that the only war that's being fought here is for control of our minds and what we perceive as real. and what we choose to respond to. If there is anything that sums up all of indigenous peoples, and I'm not just talking in North America, I'm talking indigenous first peoples on every continent, Kalahari Bushmen in Africa, in Australia, in Asia, Bitakia Yasin, is the awareness that we are all connected. There is no them and there is no us. There is no division. Because when we start to respect all of that, we begin to respect ourselves. Now there's a major, obvious caveat here. When mankind was living in balance with this planet, human population was fairly stable at about 1 billion people. There are 6.1 billion people on this planet alive today who did not exist before oil and natural gas and nuclear power. There is going to be a die-off. That is a balancing. That cannot be averted. I cannot offer some happy Pollyanna solution to that. Love is the only vibration. It's a higher vibration than fear. Our physical reality is a product of our consciousness, which is a product of what we carry in our hearts. And if we carry fear in our hearts to the point where the consciousness is one of fear, then all we would manifest would be more destruction. The means to save, to resurrect, to make amends with, to reconcile with, to heal ourselves with Mother Earth and everything that lives here will only become available to us once we realize that cooperation rather than competition, that love rather than fear is the only state of consciousness in which we can successfully live. And lo and behold, those are the ways our ancestors lived 40,000 years ago. Those are the ways the Lakota lived on the plain, the way the Apache lived in the desert, the way they lived in South America, the way the indigenous people, they lived in a state of love and balance for everything. But we are drunken humans on this mad, addictive desire for another line of cocaine, another dose of cheap energy, another car, another joke, what? Look at where it has brought us. Now that all of human race stands at the brink of extinction, and we may die, life will go on, spirit's going to be fine, we're just going to go some other place. I don't believe death is an end, it's a door. You go through it. You know, Crazy Horse, the great mystic, said the spirit world's more real than this one. He wanted to spend more time there than here, because this place gets to be real hard sometimes. But we stand at this most amazing moment, the end of the fourth sun. There is an answer. Now, 7 billion souls aren't going to make that. I don't think. It would be nice. It might happen. I don't know what miracles lie out there. But one thing that people on this planet it's really starting to sink in is what we've been doing is not working. What the whole human race has been doing. Until you change the way money works, you change nothing. You have to stop infinite growth. The only way, if we want to live and if we want children to live after us, is to stop human industrial activity right now. Otherwise, we're an alcoholic, cocaine addict, heroin addict, sitting at a bar stool weighing 80 pounds, anemic, trying to convince ourselves that we look good with AIDS and herpes and all these damn diseases. We're slamming booze down our throat, we're sticking a needle in our arm, we're snorting the line, and we're committing suicide saying everything's under control. It ain't. So we are reaching a climax, and some people would say, and I don't believe this at all, some people would say that Mother Earth is going to kill us like we're an infection. I believe, and it's my experience even now, that Mother Earth, because we are of her, we are her children. We are created from her. What mother cannot love her child? Still loves us unconditionally and is begging for us to wake up. People like me and Guy McPherson and Dmitry Orlov, many of us who have walked this path for a long time, we all realized that in 2012 that by Cartesian analysis, we had encountered a number of problems that it was not possible to solve. Okay? Now it's become that much more in our faces. I serve the warriors. I serve the ones who are out there, who are the best of the best. And that makes us all sharper together because nobody's as smart as all of us. I get feeds from all over the world. And I can really see and participate in this awakening that is taking place. And it's one of those great dramas. Will the awakening happen in time to make a difference? You know, I firmly believe that the level of consciousness and love that we carry and we create and the people that we surround ourselves with, what we hold in our hearts at the moment of our death makes all the difference in the world. There are people who would lay down and die. Well, that's not a warrior's path. You know, just give up, just get loaded, just get stoned, just party. Well, that doesn't, you get tired of that real quick if you try it. But it's what's in your heart, it's what you're doing. It's the warrior's way. You fight until the last minute. One way or another, no matter what happens, there is a balancing that's coming. There is a balancing that is here, that it is now.